Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. We're open for business. China rolls out more supportive measures to try and attract foreign investors.
Our other headlines: who'll pay the price for President Trump's trade tariffs, the warnings about unintended consequences for global consumers, and inflation.
It's also about efficiency. We're doubling down on efficiency.
In an exclusive interview, the Mercedes boss tells us how he plans to get the company back on the road.
And how Brazil's colourful carnival is getting serious about recycling its mountains of rubbish. Come and do business in China. That's the message from Beijing. China's trying to reduce the barriers for foreign investors, including allowing foreign companies to use domestic loans to make equity investments. The government expects the move to send a strong signal about China's determination to further open up its market.
So how much do foreign investors contribute to China's growth? Well, foreign companies provide nearly 7% of the total jobs in China. 1/7 of national taxation is generated from foreign investment, and half of the electronics and high-tech products exported are created by foreign investors. In 2024, foreign investors set up over 1.2 million new businesses in China with a value of more than $2.8 trillion. But in January, overall foreign direct investment shrunk by more than 13% compared with a year ago. Beijing says that that's due to the deterioration of the global trade environment. Individual countries, though, are increasing investment to China. The UK, South Korea, the Netherlands and Japan top the list, with the UK's investment up substantially in January. Rory Green is the chief China economist for independent investment research provider TS Lombard. Good to see you, Rory. Welcome back to the programme. So will this plan to increase foreign investment in China work, do you think?
I think it's a good start, and along with the improvement we're expecting to see in the macroeconomic environment, which is of course a massive factor for prospective investors in China, we are expecting an increase in the domestic demand side of GDP this year, which is really critical to pull in foreign investors. I think those two combined, and we will see a better environment for FDI into China over the next couple of years, certainly compared to the last few.
So what challenges do you think investors might still face despite this plan being brought in?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the growth factor has been a big challenge in the last couple of years, and the returns on cash as well. So big hurdle is growth relative to the pre-COVID economy. The domestic market has been relatively sluggish. It's been exports powering growth. And this year we'll see improvement on that side with investment and consumption picking up, helping to pull in investment. So that'll be critical. And the other factor when looking at FDI is what companies can do with the money they make in China. And when interest rates are high, the RMB is strong, that money stays within the PRC. Over the last couple of years, the dollar has been exceptionally strong, and rates outside of China have been very high, certainly relative to the PRC, and that's pulled money out. And that's still the case, with a bit of a hurdle on that front for China to overcome, but at least on the growth side, we're looking at a much better environment.
Well, one new factor, if you like, US tariffs, of course. What role might they have to play in foreign investments in China?
Not just for China, but for everyone. It's a huge source of uncertainty at the moment. And until there is clarity on how high the US tariffs may go or whether a deal could occur with China, it is going to delay new export-orientated investment into China and many other economies as well. But of course, China under real scrutiny. For investment that is targeted to make in China for the China market, tariffs shouldn't have much of an impact. But the export side is really where we're looking for some damage there.
So the overall number's down, but we did see some countries increasing investment into China, the UK among them. Why was that?
I think for the UK, we are highly compatible with China's current stage of development. We are excelling in service exports, finance, law, architecture, whereas China is predominantly a manufacturing powerhouse. So very compatible economies, relatively few areas of direct competition. So the avenues for UK investment into China remain pretty strong at this stage.
Rory, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the programme. That's Rory Green, Chief China Economist for independent investment research provider TS Lombard.
Thank you.
China has criticised the US decision to potentially increase tariffs on other countries. Beijing has warned that Trump's reciprocal tariffs will seriously undermine global trade. President Trump says Washington and Beijing could reach a new deal to settle trade disputes. China's foreign ministry urged the Trump administration to solve trade friction through negotiations.
Well, this all comes, of course, as President Trump says he'll announce more tariffs in the coming month, including a 25% levy on wood and forest products. That's on top of the duties already planned for imported cars, semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. Let's talk to our correspondent Nick Harper, who's in Washington for us. Nick, so more tariffs on the horizon. What's all this going to do to inflation?
That's right, Jamie. Donald Trump suggesting also on Wednesday that lumber and wood will be added to that list of tariffs that could potentially come in as early as April the 2nd. And really, economists are saying it's only going to do one thing. These tariffs will push up inflation. Now, the US and companies who are importing these products, they're going to have to think what to do about these increased costs because of the tariffs. And they're expected, many of them at least, to pass on those costs to the consumers. So prices for goods will go up, the cost of living will go up. And remember, Donald Trump campaigned on bringing down the cost of living, bringing down inflation and improving the US economy. The other thing that he wants to do is try and bring down interest rates. But the problem is the US Federal Reserve says it's not in a hurry to cut rates. We might not even see any rate cuts this year. It had been predicted we might see a couple, and that's because the Fed is worried that these tariffs are adding really an extra element of unpredictability to the US economy, and the Fed expects that tariffs will push up inflation. If we look at the official language from the minutes of their last meeting that came out on Wednesday, Fed officials said that the president's policies will hinder the disinflation process, therefore suggesting that inflation is likely to go up. Jamie?
And all of this uncertainty has had an impact on the price of gold, hasn't it?
Oh, it certainly has. I mean, gold is commonly seen as that safe haven for investors. Much more stability in gold than, say, stocks. Certainly much more stability than cryptocurrency. And with all of this uncertainty surrounding tariffs, it seems to be pushing investors in the direction of gold, that perceived safe space for investments. And that means that gold prices have been going up and up. They hit an all-time high on Thursday, reaching $2,947.11 per ounce. In 2025 alone, we've seen the price of gold increase by about 12%. And if we look at the last 12 months as a whole, it's gone up by a whopping 45%. It's increased so much that it's broken through all of the price predictions already for 2025. So we're seeing many companies increasing those price predictions, suggesting that we may see a value of about $3,100 by year end.
Nick, thank you for that. Our correspondent Nick Harper in Washington.
Foreign ministers from the G20 are meeting in Johannesburg to discuss global trade tensions and Ukraine. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is speaking at the gathering, but notably absent is US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who described South African policies as anti-American. In his welcome address, President Cyril Ramaphosa vowed to ensure developing countries will be heard by the rich nations.
This summit's location underscores the need for African voices to be heard on critical global issues like sustainable development, the digital economy, and the shift towards green energy.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, who's in the driving seat, how artificial intelligence will change the face of your car and the driving experience.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Mercedes-Benz is flashing its hazard warning lights, announcing it expects earnings to fall further this year after a slump of 30% in 2024.
The German giants unveiled further cost-cutting and more petrol cars than electric vehicles in its new product range to boost performance. Mercedes is not alone in facing challenges, as auto executives across Europe warn of rising energy and labour costs.
Juliet Mann spoke to Ola Källenius, the CEO of the Mercedes-Benz Group.
If we look at 2024, we saw a market that was quite challenged, especially in China towards the second half of the year. And in that environment, we have printed today very solid results, especially the free cash flow above 9 billion euro is a very, very strong number considering the macro and market environment and also in our competitive set. But we're not complacent. We're going to continue to work on new technology, new products, but at the same time at our efficiency levels.
But the demand just doesn't seem to be there for EVs, does it? I mean, what's it going to take for you to get the business to where you want it to be?
The EV market around the world is heterogeneous. And in China, it has started kind of going from the bottom, going up. And we have our strongest footprint on the top end and the higher segments, where still the electrified high-tech combustion engine is the choice customers are looking for, where we have a very, very strong market position. But we are gradually growing organically our EV footprint. And in Europe, in the United States as well, we're about to launch a whole host of EV vehicles here in the next 2 to 3 years. On top of that, class-leading plug-in hybrids.
There are some bumps in the road, though, aren't there? I mean, tariffs are a pain, but isn't the big issue all around cost? I mean, you're competing with some of the big Chinese companies, for sure, when it comes to cost, when it comes to technology, when it comes to market share.
It is true that the macro environment is difficult, and 2025 we take a cautious view on that, and there is a high level of competitive intensity. How do you approach that as Mercedes-Benz, the inventor of the automobile? It's through innovation and new product. And we have the biggest product offensive coming in the history, product and technology innovation offensive in our history in the next couple of years. But it's also about efficiency. We're doubling down on efficiency, and we're going through literally the whole company, the whole business system, and leaving no stone unturned. We want to save up to 5 billion euro compared to our original plan in 2027 and savings leading up in 2025 and 2026. So it's a situation where we're investing more than we've ever done before into new technology and products, but at the same time, we're emphasizing the efficiency efforts.
You're also investing really big in China, aren't you? I mean, that's your largest single market, but you look at the sales figures; those are being squeezed. I mean, what's the future for the brand?
In China, over the next years, we are embarking on a 14 billion renminbi investment program into new models, revamping our factories and getting ready for launch of these new models, both on the EV side, but also on the high-tech ICE side. In 2024, in very challenging market conditions, we actually were the #1 luxury and premium brand in China. But it's not just about that. It is now going forward into the future with new and attractive products specifically designed for the Chinese market.
Let's move from China back to your home turf, to Germany. Big election coming up this weekend. What does the car industry need to do, or need to see the new government doing to fix the ailing economy? Because a lot of the pressures have been coming from the declining auto sector.
I think we need to take the whole European view on this. Last year, the Commission asked Mario Draghi to do an inventory of European competitiveness. When I read that report and I had a chance to speak to Mario Draghi himself, I left that meeting thinking to myself, let's do that. And the first competitive compass that has now been presented by the EU Commission goes in that direction.
Chinese car makers are racing to build artificial intelligence into their vehicles.
More than a dozen companies are expected to use DeepSeek, the AI model, which surged to the top of the global download charts last month.
Our correspondent Michael Murillia has the story. Michael.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Jamie. Artificial intelligence is sparking some changes in China's auto sector. It is the drive for DeepSeek. Car manufacturer GWM says it will install DeepSeek in its vehicles. Leapmotor is doing the same, saying the Chinese-developed AI tool will improve the virtual assistant already in some of its cars. Geely is building its own AI infrastructure, but it's using DeepSeek to develop it. And then there's BYD, China's biggest electric vehicle manufacturer. Its shares hit record levels last week after it said it would build DeepSeek into its self-driving models. But what does all this mean? Will DeepSeek suddenly drive you around? The short answer, no, at least not yet. It will probably be integrated into so-called digital cockpits. These systems track your preferences and habits. For example, your route to work, your seat position and settings, even the music you're playing through your devices. It then delivers a custom-made experience. One study suggests global demand for digital cockpit systems will climb almost 50% between 2024 and 2030. And here's the kicker. Analysts say 93% of China's new cars could have digital cockpits within the next 5 years. Jamie, Robin?
Michael, thank you very much. Michael Murillia with a terrifying vision of the future. Let's talk next to Peter Wells, the director of the Centre for Automotive Industry at Cardiff University. Peter, welcome back. Given the stalling of the EV industry in many parts of the world, isn't it rather brave to confidently forecast that this is the road ahead?
Well, it's, as you say, quite a daunting prospect and quite an ambitious prospect. I think there's so much interest and indeed hype around artificial intelligence at the moment, and that's driving this interest in many sectors, including automotive. There will be a huge impact, but perhaps it won't be quite as catastrophic or quite as dramatic as is currently being portrayed.
Our correspondent Michael was suggesting that many of these AI features are not too far away, but taking a back seat to drive you to work is miles off, isn't it?
It's quite a long way off yet, and don't forget, it's one thing to put these systems into a new car, it's another thing entirely to have the entire fleet of all cars in use having all of these systems on board, and that will take a very long time indeed. But also, think about this a little bit. If you've got a car fully running autonomously in this way, that car will obey every single traffic law there is. Now ask yourself, how often does that actually occur in real life when people are driving those cars? And I think you begin to see some of the issues here, because we take a lot of liberties as drivers around the strict interpretation of driving laws, things like speeding, things like parking, things like where we can go at junctions and so forth. If everybody had to obey all the rules, we would be a lot safer for sure, but the culture of driving would have to change quite significantly.
Peter, you sound like a man who jumps red lights, but it's a serious point, isn't it? Regulation hasn't caught up with the tech, has it? I mean, who is in charge when AI is driving?
Well, this is also a problem. There's also a technical issue. Do you have the intelligence and the processing capability inside the car, or do you essentially rely on being able to communicate with the cloud systems outside the car? And, you know, as one of the advantages of the Chinese approach to artificial intelligence has been that it's less power intensive, it's less resource intensive, there's more scope to put it on the car, in which case the liabilities and all of the legal issues and all of the structures around that are much more focused on the car and the driver and the owner, and less on the infrastructure and the rest of the system.
Peter, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming back on the programme. Peter Wells, Director of the Centre for Automotive Industry at Cardiff University.
Lloyds has nearly tripled the amount of money it's setting aside to cover the car finance mis-selling scandal to $1.5 billion. The UK bank and other providers of finance for car loans are accused of not being clear enough about the commission paid to car dealers. Millions of motorists could be in line for compensation.
ChatGPT creator OpenAI says it now has 400 million weekly active users. That's a rise of 33% in less than 3 months. This is despite the arrival of the Chinese-owned challenger DeepSeek. The American AI company has pointed to what it calls the natural progression of people taking up ChatGPT as its popularity grows.
Chinese tech company Lenovo has reported a surge in profits. The company's third quarter revenue rose by a fifth to nearly $19 billion due to strong demand for its AI services. Net profit more than doubled from the previous year to nearly $700 million. Lenovo said it had integrated DeepSeek's technology into its products.
China's e-commerce giant Alibaba has reported better than expected fourth quarter revenue, up 8% on last year. It's largely due to solid performance by its cloud division. The company has been focusing on AI investment and has gained some $100 billion of market value so far this year.
Airbus says it's looking to make 820 new planes this year, despite seeing an 8% dip in its 2024 income. The world's largest aerospace manufacturer says it's counting on solid demand for its products to overcome ongoing supply chain problems.
Turkey is exporting eggs to the United States. 15,000 tons will be dispatched after the latest bird flu outbreak in the US sent prices flying. Shipments will continue until July in a deal worth around $26 million. The cost of eggs rose 15% in the US last month after rising over 60% last year.
Japan's government has approved a new energy strategy with a focus on nuclear power and renewables as its primary carbon-free sources.
But the policy is being heavily criticised as it reverses the previous plan, which focused on reducing nuclear dependence. Our correspondent Terence Terashima reports.
The Japanese government approved a revised strategic energy plan on Tuesday, the first update in 3 years. The plan is a guideline for the country's mid to long-term energy policy. It states that renewable energy and nuclear power generation will be utilized to the maximum extent possible to ensure a stable supply of electricity and reduce carbon dioxide emissions. This is a complete reversal from the previous policy adopted after the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, which stated that Japan would reduce dependence on nuclear power as much as possible. The change of policy has invited strong public criticism.
This is insane. I don't know what they're thinking. At least up until the 6th Strategic Energy Plan, it had a line saying it would reduce dependency on nuclear power as much as possible.
The question is, have we properly analyzed the problems concerning the seabed, the earthquake, or the tsunami, as the Nuclear Regulation Authority has stated? They haven't done anything at all. I think it's strange to increase our reliance or build nuclear power plants when there is a possibility of accidents happening in the future.
The government also outlined its 2040 vision for green transformation, a strategy for decarbonization and industrial policies. Japan aims to achieve a carbon-neutral society with net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. However, there is concern that the government will sacrifice public safety to achieve its green transformation policy. Japan is an earthquake-prone country. There have been a number of large quakes since 2011, including one of magnitude 7.6 that devastated the Noto Peninsula last year. Concern centers on another possible nuclear disaster in event of a major quake. Activists are planning protests on weekends leading up to March 11th, the anniversary of the Great East Quake. Terence Teishima, CGTN, Tokyo.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Hamas returns the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages as part of the ceasefire deal. The concern grows in Gaza about the coming days.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. We're open for business. China rolls out more supportive measures to try and attract foreign investors.
Our other headlines: who will pay the price for President Trump's trade tariffs, the warnings about unintended consequences for global consumers and inflation.
And artificial intelligence is sparking major change in China's auto industry as car makers race to build it into their vehicles.
The bodies of 4 Israeli hostages have arrived in Israel from Gaza. Hamas says the bodies are those of Oded Lifshitz, Shiri Bibas and her 2 sons, Kefir and Ariel, who were the 2 youngest captives taken on the 7th of October. DNA tests will now be done to confirm their identities.
It's the first return of dead bodies during the current ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Negotiations on a second phase are expected to begin in the coming days.
Our correspondent Jonathan Regev is in Tel Aviv.
I was at Hostage Square this morning where people gathered to watch every hostage return. And if we compare it to the previous ones, there was always a lot of emotion, a lot of happiness, a major collective sigh of relief every time that you see hostages coming out of the Hamas car, being transferred to the Red Cross car, and then meetings with families. It's all very emotional, very happy. Not today. Today was completely different, a very somber mood, and the fact that 4 bodies of citizens, all of them are citizens, who were abducted, kidnapped from their homes, that's sad enough. And then the news the three of the bodies belong, as you mentioned, to Shiri Bibas, Kfir Bibas, and Ariel Bibas. One of them kidnapped when he was a 9-month-old baby. That is something that is essentially tormenting the Israeli society. The feelings are very somber. Yes, it's true that there is some kind of relief for families. They do not longer have to live in uncertainty. There's some kind of a closure, but a very, very sad closure.
Hamas is due to release 6 living hostages on Saturday, followed by 4 more bodies next week, in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners.
If that goes ahead, it would complete the first phase of this ceasefire. Talks on the next stage, which were due to start over 2 weeks ago, remain uncertain, and many in Gaza are worried about what's to come.
All of Gaza's residents are afraid of a return to fighting. We've experienced so much terror and humiliation. We've seen all sorts of suffering. We never want to experience war again.
Our correspondent Rami Al-Magari is in Gaza City.
The feeling in Gaza is actually some kind of a mix of optimism and pessimism towards the upcoming stage of the ceasefire deal. That is based on the latest Israeli remarks about that the second phase will be more difficult and more complicated, in a sense that Israel wants to maintain the cease, wanted to, and said that it wants to the first phase to be extended ahead of the next phase of the ceasefire, because the next phase after the first phase will witness, according to the truce deal, will witness actually an Israeli withdrawal from the populated areas of the Gaza Strip towards the eastern parts and the northern parts of the Strip itself, about 1.5 kilometers deep into Palestinian territories, constituting a size of 40 kilometers of the Gaza Strip. This, and also the withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor in the south of the territory near the Rafah crossing terminal, which would mean more ease of the living conditions for the Gaza population. The concern also emanates from the fact that the mobile homes, the tents, the heavy machineries and other needed supplies for the repair of the damage in Gaza are not yet entering in the amount that has been agreed upon during the ceasefire talks. Today there were reports about the entry of truckloads of those tents and mobile homes in the northern Gaza Strip, but still the Gaza Strip does not see the spirit of these materials across the parts of the Gaza Strip. That is the feeling in Gaza. They are hoping that the next phase will start and that the first phase will end up very smoothly and as agreed upon during the truce talks between Israel and Hamas.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting the US envoy Keith Kellogg in Kyiv, but Ukrainian officials say a planned news conference, which they were both due to speak at, has been cancelled at the request of Washington.
This comes as a rift between the two presidents grows, with Donald Trump calling Zelensky a dictator and Ukraine's leader accusing the US president of living in a Russian disinformation space. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Kyiv. So Stuart, what more can you tell us?
Well, the last we heard from one of the spokespeople of Volodymyr Zelensky is that he was going into those talks with fighting spirit. Keith Kellogg, the US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, having met the Foreign Minister, the Speaker of the Parliament here, and also other officials earlier in the day. But indeed, with that press conference cancelled, reportedly at the request of Washington, no news on what exactly they discussed or how it went. We might get an update from President Volodymyr Zelensky during his usual evening address later in the day, but we do know going into this, he said that he was keen, of course, to put forward Kyiv's views, notably on the fact that Ukraine must be involved in any negotiations, and also that he believes that America must be involved in securing Ukraine's peace. Zelensky said that he'd spent many hours talking with top-level military officials, intelligence officials and senior members of his government in order to try to work out how to approach this and convince the United States to continue supporting Ukraine. The foreign minister afterwards has spoken about his meeting with Keith Kellogg, and he said during that meeting they tried to find ways towards a comprehensive, just and lasting peace, and he said he reaffirmed Ukraine's willingness to achieve peace through strength. He reiterated, though, and this is the key point for Ukraine, that that has to come through shared work with the United States, not even just with European countries.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Kyiv.
Well, the Kremlin has backed President Trump's outburst on President Zelensky, accusing the Ukrainian president of making inadmissible remarks about world leaders. Let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, the Kremlin has also said that any plans to send European peacekeeping troops to Ukraine would be unacceptable.
That's right. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said that Moscow is closely monitoring all the reports about the potential sending of the European peacekeepers to Ukraine, because it is raising concerns in Moscow, and the reason for that is that it will involve the military forces of a NATO country, and that will be changing the repercussions for Russia's security. So therefore, Moscow says it is closely monitoring and it has concerns with regards to that. We also understand from the Russian side that there have been some remarks regarding the behavior and the statements made by the Ukrainian leadership, with Dmitry Peskov saying that the comments of Vladimir Zelensky are sometimes unacceptable and inadmissible. He also has said that the fall of Zelensky's rating is an obvious thing, and he also noted that the Ukrainian leadership is spending the Western taxpayers' money, and sometimes, according to Moscow, uncontrollably. All in all, we understand that the issue of the Ukrainian settlement is now one of the points on the agenda, and the Russian side says that Russia and the United States have agreed to continue this dialogue. In fact, Moscow says that the two countries have agreed to continue dialogue on all of the aspects of the bilateral relations. So Ukraine is one of those. But at the same time, Moscow says that there are a few concrete steps that have been made so far, because it is a very complex matter. So at this stage, the understanding is that the way that the current administration in the United States is dealing with this Ukrainian situation and with Russia in general is a stark difference from what has been seen under the previous administration of Joe Biden, and Moscow does take a note of that, as well as the differences that Washington has with Kyiv.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow.
So, European countries reportedly considering sending nearly 30,000 peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if a deal's reached, a proposal that, as we were hearing, Russia has described as unacceptable. Leaders from across the region are scrambling to respond to what appears to be a huge shift in US foreign policy on Ukraine. Our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris.
We have been speaking about a peacekeeping force for a few days now, since Keir Starmer was here in Paris to attend the first round of those Western allies talks that were taking place at the Elysee Palace. But that would require forces to be in and around and patrolling a demilitarized zone. What this reassurance force might well end up doing, if it is to be confirmed, if they are deployed, if there is a peace deal reached, there are lots of criteria that still need to be fulfilled for us to be able to get there. But if it were to be deployed, we might see thousands of troops stationed throughout Ukraine, not just in the eastern part of the country, protecting ports, protecting railway stations, cities, critical national infrastructure like nuclear power plants. There might be a naval capacity as well added to this force. For example, Britain's Royal Navy, which the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that he would welcome a detachment from the Royal Navy patrolling the Black Sea. There would also be an aerial capacity as well, Air Force jets potentially stationed in neighbouring Romania and Poland to be able to protect Ukraine's skies and to try to reopen Ukrainian airspace to civilian aircraft. The only way in and out of the country at the moment is by road or by rail. Since the beginning of what Russia describes as the special military operation, what Ukraine describes as the invasion in 2022, the airspace has been closed to civilian aircraft. So that would be an attempt as well to be able to reopen that side of it. Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer are certainly at the vanguard of the European nations who are in favour of pursuing something like this, an approved detachment of troops inside Ukraine if an end to the conflict is reached. However, there's a lot of pushback from fellow European allies, and there has already been pushback, as you mentioned, from Russia, which has said that even if it weren't under a NATO umbrella, if there were troops inside Ukraine from NATO countries like the UK and France, then it would see that as unacceptable.
So what else is Europe doing to try and adjust to this changing geopolitical landscape?
Yeah, well, Robin, as you mentioned as well, this landscape is changing the moment, not even by the day, often by the hour in terms of the management of the discourse between Washington, Moscow, Brussels here in Paris, London, Kiev, to try to understand the picture going forward, particularly led by the US. We've heard from the Secretary General of NATO today, speaking in the last hour. Mark Rutte said that, quote, we should continue to strengthen Ukraine's hand so that they can come to the negotiating table from a position of strength. We all want to see an end to the terrible aggression against Ukraine. It will require robust security guarantees to reach an enduring peace in Ukraine, and that's also worth noting. It was one of the key parts of the statement released after Wednesday's second round of talks here in Paris between France and other Western allies, that they want to see a lasting, enduring peace in Ukraine. And I'll also just mention the fact that the G20 foreign ministers are meeting at the moment in South Africa. The French foreign minister there in attendance, Jean-Noël Barrot, and he has said that the picture that France will be painting and presenting at the G20 foreign ministers meeting is that they believe in a global order based on a rules-based order, a global order based on international law, not one based on power and aggression. He has said that we do not want to avert our eyes from any crisis or violation of international law. A country under attack is a country under attack, and an aggressor country is an aggressor country.
2 women have been killed in a knife attack in the Czech Republic. It happened at a shopping centre in a town east of Prague. The police say they've detained a 16-year-old in connection with the incident and that there's no further danger to the public.
South Korea's impeached president has appeared in court for the first hearing of his criminal trial. Yoon Suk-yeol is accused of leading an insurrection with his imposition of martial law in December. It's the first criminal prosecution of a serving leader, and if convicted, Yoon could face prison. He's also facing an impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court.
The former Spanish football chief, Luis Rubiales, says he will appeal after Spain's High Court found him guilty of sexual assault for kissing the player Jenni Hermoso without her consent.
The court fined him over $10,000 but acquitted him of coercion. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports from Madrid.
Well, lots of surprise in Spain today. First of all, that there was a verdict at all. We waited a year and a half for this to go to trial, and then the verdict came in less than a week, sending journalists scrambling. So that was the big surprise. I think you could say that a guilty verdict was expected here in Spain. Everybody saw that kiss in August 2023 when Luis Rubiales on the World Cup podium with Jennifer Hermoso. But I think there was a little bit of a surprise that the other parts of the verdict went against Jenni Hermoso. Rubiales was acquitted along with 3 other people of coercion, despite a pretty strong case by the prosecution. We saw Jorge Vilda, the head coach of the women's team. He was one of those who was acquitted. During the trial, we heard from, for example, Jennifer Hermoso, her brother. He said that Vilda had pressured him to convince his sister to make a video with Rubiales that would kind of make all of this go away. We also heard from teammate Misa Rodriguez on the plane. She said that she saw Rubiales in conversation with Hermoso and that afterwards she was in tears. So a not guilty verdict for those charges of coercion has surprised people, as has the lenience of the fine, just over $10,000, as you mentioned. That's the legal fine. $3,000, just over $3,000 in compensation or personal injury that Rubiales has to pay to Hermoso. So that definitely has surprised people. Also, I think people were expecting a much harsher sentence here.
So, Ken, are we going to see this change anything in women's sport and the attitudes around it?
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about the sentence here, no jail time for Rubiales, for example. I think that women's rights campaigners were expecting a little bit more than that in terms of women's sport. Definitely, Hermoso has done a lot to raise the profile of cases like this. I think that it's shaken the impunity that definitely existed in these institutions before this case. And not just in football. You know, this became, I think we were speaking at the time, Robin, when this happened in 2023, and we called it Spain's Me Too movement. So this has changed things in terms of now we see much clearer consent laws, for example. Those were drawn up by the Podemos party, and we've seen other high-profile cases here in Spain on sexual assault in the workplace. For example, ironically, one of the politicians of Podemos, Íñigo Errejón, he's facing charges right now for women who came forward and said that he had engaged in that type of behavior. So Jenni Hermoso, she has definitely changed the impunity around these institutions, and she'll be remembered for this long after her playing career is over.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the morning after the night before. How Carnival in Brazil is getting serious about recycling all that rubbish.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Today, China makes 2 out of every 3 of the world's electric vehicles.
The arguments about whether the future is electric are basically non-existent anymore.
What seemed like a blink of an eye, things changed.
The Chinese, they have a 30% cost competitive edge in their sourcing compared to ours.
We must defend ourselves against unfair practices.
We do oppose tariffs. We don't think that's the right measure.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Germany goes to the polls on Sunday, and the country is expecting to see more new voters than ever before.
A wave of mass migration is changing traditional demographics. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Originally from Thailand, Papichia Swartz came to Germany with her German husband in 2019. She recently acquired citizenship and will be voting in Sunday's elections as a German for the first time.
I'm very excited to perform my duty as the citizen of this country and to shape my own future and the future of my children.
According to recent surveys, there has been a steady increase in naturalizations over the past 4 or 5 years, with an average age significantly younger than the general population average. Since 2021, over 500,000 people received German citizenship and are therefore eligible to vote in their first federal election.
This is mainly coming from the Syrian refugees who have arrived in 2015 and 16 and who are now becoming eligible for German citizenship and now acquiring it.
This coincides with the easing of German citizenship laws that came into effect last summer, lowering the residency requirements and also allowing for dual nationalities, a move especially important for the country's sizable Turkish population, who are descendants of guest workers and have been in Germany for generations.
Voters with immigrant backgrounds make up a substantial demographic here in Germany, around 12% of the electorate, according to official statistics, with immigration, inflation, and the economy topping their concerns.
Pat is also concerned about the rise in the far right and anti-migration movement, which has seen an increase in support recently.
I'm leaning toward the Socialist Party, the Linke, maybe the Green. The majority of their policy that I think is more for the people who are not 1% of the country.
While what influences people at the polling stations differs, traditionally these new citizen voters tend to vote for center-left parties. However, over time, their politics can become more conservative.
What I hear often, this idea that, we've paid our dues, and a lot of the misinformation that we hear about, refugees just using social benefits not working.
Yet interestingly, while the demographics of what defines a German might be changing, studies also show that their voting habits are not that far off from those with non-immigrant backgrounds. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
Apple is pinning high hopes on its first product launch of the year, its latest iPhone. It's been a rather bumpy few months for Apple. Sales of iPhones in China dropped at the end of last year. And of course, as we've been reporting, US tariffs loom large.
It's almost 20 years since the first edition was released, and while the hardware and strategy behind the device has changed, the company hopes that sales will remain robust.
Our correspondent Mark New reports.
In its first product unveiling of 2025, Apple introduced the iPhone 16e. Coming in at $599, the 16e is the cheapest iPhone, but it eliminates the even cheaper sub-$500 iPhone SE line.
Apple is in the process of rebranding the bottom line of their iPhones, and that's really more of an important marketing message. That they are basically saying, even at $599, while it may be a little bit premium compared to some of the cheaper stuff, the fact is it's packed with a lot of features.
Those features are driven by Apple's most powerful chip, the A18. The phone has crash detection to automatically contact emergency services if you've been in an accident, and it includes satellite service when you don't have a cellular connection. The 16e also includes its AI system, Apple Intelligence.
It's deeply personal, built with industry-leading privacy, and integrated across the apps you use most, like Photos, where you can clean up a distraction or find a specific photo just by describing it. Create the perfect emoji by typing a few words.
The iPhone 16e will soon be available in 59 regions and countries, including in China. In fact, just a week ago, Chinese company Alibaba formed a partnership with Apple to allow Apple to use Alibaba's AI to help power iPhones in China.
The Chinese want to support, their own technology companies as much as possible. And I think this is a nod from Apple and it's a wise nod. And the Chinese market is still pretty strong. They've had a little bit of bumpy ride because of the competition. But the iPhone 16e is getting into a better price point that I think will be very attractive in China.
Beharin also points out that inside the 16E, Apple is for the first time using its own 5G modem, instead of incorporating ones from suppliers like Qualcomm.
The most noticeable fact is that Apple is now introducing their own modem silicon into their iPhones, and that suggests, of course, that they made a breakthrough in the modem architecture, and that they probably will start using their own modems in their iPhones in the future.
Beharin says that aligns with the vision of founder Steve Jobs, who emphasized finding ways for the company to control its own destiny. Mark News, CGTN, Palo Alto, California.
In Brazil, celebrations have begun ahead of the official start of Carnival next week. But behind the dazzling costumes lies a big waste problem.
Now the Carnival has a cunning plan to try to reduce the rubbish and give it a new lease of life. Our correspondent Lucrecia Franco reports.
Techno Macumba, joyful, vibrant, colorful. A popular street band celebrating Afro-Brazilian deities with muscular samba rhythms. One of the over 480 blocos bands officially approved to parade this year in Rio de Janeiro. What makes this bloco so special? The fact that its costumes are second-hand. A few days earlier, Ciro Barcelos, the band's artistic director, visited this warehouse in downtown Rio, selecting from past samba school parade materials for this year's Bloco Extravaganza. It's the headquarters of Sustenta Carnaval, Sustainable Carnival, a project that either donates or resells Rio's carnival costumes.
These costumes are not garbage. They are works of art crafted by anonymous artists. Pure art, the very essence of Rio's carnival. They should be used again and again.
With the Carnaval de Callao. According to Sustenta Carnaval founder Mariana Pinho, each ton of reused material prevents 47.2 tons of carbon from entering the atmosphere. What many people don't realize is that 95% of these materials are imported from China.
We are glad that China has an ambitious sustainability target, and we are combining this effort and this ethos of using the materials that come from China, but multiplying and giving new life away in many different ways.
Pinho, a carnival expert and advocate for a circular economy, says that a discarded costume can take 300 to 400 years to decompose. The materials in these costumes can be used far beyond Carnival, in theater, cinema, fashion, and in other creative and educational sectors. The possibilities are limitless. And as the costumes make their way back into Rio streets with blocos like Techno Macumba, the goal is to ensure the materials help tell and retell Brazil's Africa-rooted folklore as many times as possible, increasing efficiency, reducing waste, and contributing to improving the global environment during one of the world's biggest parties. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
The headlines again. We're open for business. China rolls out more supportive measures to try and attract foreign investors.
Our other headlines: who will pay the price for President Trump's trade tariffs? The warnings about unintended consequences for global consumers and inflation.
And AI is sparking major change in China's auto industry as car makers race to build it into their vehicles.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN is Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.